There's a rule everyone picks up early with dividends. You can take the big yield now, or you can take the smaller one that grows faster. You don't get both. Britain's two pharmaceutical giants are the cleanest test of that rule I've found anywhere in the FTSE. Same industry, same index, same 10 years. And today, one of them pays you nearly twice as much as the other. So which of the two has actually paid its shareholders more? The answer starts somewhere I wasn't expecting. For 5 straight years, neither of these companies raised its dividend at all. Not a bad patch at one of them, both of them standing still at the same time. And then, 8 months apart, both boards changed their minds. Quick one first. None of this is advice. I'm showing you my workings. Please do your own research before you put money anywhere. Here's what standing still looks like. From 2016 to 2020, AstraZeneca declared the same dividend every single year. The same figure to the cent, 5 years running. It's on your screen. GSK did the identical thing in pounds. Same number to the penny, year after year. And it held on a year longer than AstraZeneca did. Two of the largest companies in the country, in the same industry, standing still for half a decade. And GSK wasn't hiding it. The board wrote in its own annual report that it intended to keep the dividend at that level for another year as well. Those are its words on screen, not mine. Why would two rivals both freeze? And which of them moved first? So what are you actually choosing between? AstraZeneca is a research-driven medicines business, cancer, heart and lung disease, and rare conditions after it bought a company called Haleon. It pays its dividend twice a year, and across the whole decade I looked at, it has never once reduced it. One more thing about it, and it's easy to miss. AstraZeneca doesn't set its dividend in pounds. It sets it in dollars, and somebody converts it before it reaches a British account. GSK is medicines and vaccines, and it pays 4 times a year rather than twice, which, if you're building an income, matters more than people tend to think. Until 2022, it also owned the consumer half of itself. The toothpaste, the painkillers, the everyday shelf in your bathroom cabinet. That half isn't there anymore, and it's a large part of this story. So on the surface, this is exactly the trade-off I opened with. One of them hands you far more money today, and the other has never gone backwards. Which of those is the better dividend? Hold that, because both of them are about to stop standing still. Take AstraZeneca first because it's the simpler of the two. On the 10th of February 2022, alongside its full-year results, the board ended the freeze, and it said why in its own announcement, in a single sentence. Increased confidence in future growth and cash generation. That's the whole reason. Those flat years were the ones AstraZeneca spent buying Haleon, absorbing it, and coming out the other side. Once the cash was arriving reliably again, the board started raising. And it has raised in 4 of the 5 years since, and held in the 5th. Small steps, though. Keep that word in mind. Small. Now the other one, which actually moved first, and moved in the opposite direction. GSK moved first, June 2021, and it didn't do it quietly. At an investor update, the board set out a new dividend policy for everything from 2022 onwards. Instead of defending a fixed amount, GSK would pay out a stated share of what it earned, inside a band it published in advance. That is a genuinely different promise. The board would defend a proportion and let the amount follow the earnings, and the proportion it chose was lower than the company had been paying out. So the payment came down. Not in an emergency, and not because the money ran out. The board said in public what it was going to do and then did it 13 months later. Now, a smaller check is still a smaller check. I'm not going to pretend otherwise, but whether a payment fell by choice or by necessity tells you something completely different about the company writing it. And there's a second reason the number came down that year. If you only look at a chart, you will get it badly wrong. In July 2022, GSK split itself in 2. It spun the consumer health business out as a separate company, Haleon, and listed it on its own. Here's the part that matters, and almost every chart you can pull up gets it wrong. If you held GSK shares through that split, you didn't lose that half of the business. You were handed shares in it. 1 Haleon share for every GSK share you owned. So the income didn't vanish. It moved. Part of it now arrives from a second company as a second dividend, and if you kept those shares, you're still collecting it. Which means a chart of GSK on its own after that date shows you a collapse that did not happen to you. It's the single most common mistake people make about this company. But it doesn't get GSK off the hook. If you're building a UK dividend portfolio and you want this sort of thing worked through properly rather than skimmed, subscribe. It genuinely helps. Now put both companies back together, GSK and Haleon side by side, the way a shareholder actually held them. Do that, and the combined income is still short of where it was before the split. By roughly a quarter. Both of those figures are on your screen, and I'd rather you saw them than took my word for it. So the income moved, and it also shrank. Both are true at once, and you need each of them to judge this fairly. Which is exactly why comparing 10 years of these two is harder than it looks, and exactly why it's worth doing properly. Right, 10 years. Two things before the charts, and both of them are the company's own work, not mine. When GSK split off Haleon, it also swapped 5 old shares for 4 new ones. GSK then restated its whole dividend history to match, which is why in a moment the older bars will look bigger than the ones you saw earlier. Same money, fewer shares, GSK's own restatement. And AstraZeneca declares in dollars, so dollars is what I'm showing you. The number its board actually voted on. What that turns into once it reaches a British account is a different number entirely. Now, across the 10 years from 2016, AstraZeneca's dividend ends higher than it started. Not dramatically, it went nowhere for 5 years and then climbed slowly. Across the same 10 years, GSK's ends lower than it started. Not marginally, meaningfully, and that is already counting Haleon alongside it. So, on a 10-year view, the rule everyone learns looks completely right. The one that pays you less today is the one whose dividend actually grew. And that's the answer most people stop at. I didn't, because both of these companies have changed since. Since 2023, both of them have been doing something different from the decade behind them. GSK has raised its dividend every year since that new policy took effect. And it has already told the market what it expects to pay for the whole of this year. That figure is on screen, and it's guidance, the company's own forecast, not history. AstraZeneca has kept raising too. Its most recent move was another increase to its half-year payment. And the full-year figure isn't settled either. The second half gets declared next February. So the right-hand end of these charts is partly the future, and it's labelled that way on screen. I'd rather show you that than pretend the last column is finished. On the years that are actually complete, GSK's dividend has grown faster than AstraZeneca's. And on the most recent increase each of them has announced, GSK's is about twice the size. The basis for both of those is on screen. The basis matters. Which is worth putting next to what we just saw over 10 years. So put the two windows on one screen. Over the last 10 years, AstraZeneca's dividend went up and GSK's went down. Over the last 3, it has been exactly the other way round. Same two companies, same industry. Opposite answers, depending only on where you start the clock. And that is the rule from the start of this video. Broken. Not bent. Broken in both directions by the same two companies inside the same decade. Nothing clever did it either. Two boards made 2 decisions 8 months apart, and then lived with them. GSK reset its base and grew off it, while AstraZeneca resumed growing from a base it had never touched. Which still leaves one thing unsettled. There's one more layer, and it only touches AstraZeneca. It declares its dividend in dollars. You get paid in pounds. And the rate between those two things does not sit still. Take its most recent completed year. The board raised the dividend, and the amount that actually landed in a British account went down. Both figures are on your screen. Both come straight out of AstraZeneca's own filings, and they point in opposite directions. Nobody cut anything. The board raised and the currency took it back. The declared record and the money that lands are 2 different documents. GSK simply doesn't have this problem. It sets its dividend in pounds, so what it declares is what you get, which is a genuinely dull advantage and worth exactly as much as the currency happens to move. And it isn't a one-off. If you build AstraZeneca's 10-year record out of the sterling amounts instead of the declared ones, you get the chart that's on screen now. Several drops, several apparent cuts. Not one of them happened. Everyone is the exchange rate moving on a dividend the board never reduced. That is the trap in this entire comparison, and it's why I've shown you dollars the whole way through. So, which dividend actually pays you more? Here's where I've landed, and then it's yours. If what you want is income now, one of these two hands you nearly twice as much for the same money, and it pays it 4 times a year instead of twice. When you're living off it, that isn't a small thing. If what you want is a payment that has never once gone backwards, the other one has a 10-year record its rival can't match, and it isn't close. And if what you want is for the last 3 years to carry on the way they've been going, that's a forecast. One of the numbers underneath it is guidance rather than history. I'd hold it loosely. There's one more line on your screen and I can't resolve it for you. Neither can anybody else. The rule I started with, big yield or growing yield, pick one, is a decent rule of thumb. These two just spent a decade showing you that's all it is. Whichever way you land on it, count the years as well as the yield. Tell me below which of the two you'd take and why. Happy investing.